Good day everyone and welcome to this very special episode of Radio Retrofuture. Before I want to start the show, I want to ask you for a favor. You see, when you look into the URL in the search bar above in your browser, you'll see this YouTube channel has a very random number of letters and symbols. I want to change that. However, I can only change that when I reach 100 subscribers. As I'm making this little pre-recording right here, I have 71. If you could help me reach that magical number of 100, I would be very, very grateful and will have a URL that makes actual sense. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Radio Retrofuture.
Okay, well, good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting and then, would I say, very special episode of Radio Retrofuture. Because today I have as my guests Brian David Johnson and Byrd. Oh dear, I forgot your
McDonald.
Yes, sorry, Byrd McDonald. I'm sorry. The nerves are already kicking in.
No worries.
Anyway, but enough about me. Let's talk about you gentlemen. Could you, before we get into the documentary you're making, could you get into who you are and what your backgrounds are and what you did before you started with the documentary Vintage Tomorrows?
Sure. My name is Byrd McDonald. I am a filmmaker. I've been a filmmaker for about 25 years. I live in Portland, Oregon. And this is the second feature film that I've made. The first feature film I directed was with this guy, Brian David Johnson. I'll let Brian tell you more about what he does for a living, but I've known Brian since we were both 19 years old. We were interns at a film production company, and 10 years ago we collaborated on a documentary together. So he's also my best friend and married me a year ago, so we go way back. Right now I live in Portland, Oregon. I have a film production company called Porter Panther. And for the last 10 years I've been a little bit more of a producer, but with this film I'm getting back into the director's seat, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And I'm Brian David Johnson. I'm a futurist. I've been a futurist for about 2 decades now. I work with companies that need to make decisions today that may not pay off for 5, 10, or 15 years in the future. And I sort of have an engineering and a design and filmmaking background, and the idea is being able to work with people so that they can start making decisions today and taking actions today to actually get to different futures possible, positive and negative futures. I do a lot of work with large corporations, with governments, with militaries, with trade associations. One place that I worked for about 15 years was called Intel, the Intel Corporation that makes the chip. I worked with them to design and understand what people would want to do with technology today so that they could start building it so it would be ready 10 years from now. And that's really where the idea for Vintage Tomorrows came from when I was sitting down and talking with a cultural historian by the name of James H. Carrott. We started talking about technology and where things were going, and that's really where the project came from.
Okay, more about that later. Because let's go to Byrd first and a little bit more about your perspectives on the whole steampunk movement. Let's talk about your first experience with steampunk. When did you get to learn about it?
Well, you've seen the film, so this will resonate for you. The first thing that I filmed for the documentary was my very first introduction to steampunk. I got a call on a Thursday that Brian called me and asked me if I was available on a Saturday to go to Seattle and film a dinner party. And I think the first call, that might have been all I had in terms of information. I love Brian and I'll go film anything he wants to film. And Brian wanted to capture this conversation as research for his book. And I think the second conversation he mentioned that it was a group of steampunk literati, or whatever that word is, muckety mucks in steampunk, and I didn't know what that was. And I don't know if you even gave me a really great definition, so immediately I went to Wikipedia and read about it, and I'm like, oh, I guess I recognize what that is. But I had no introduction to it. I had not read, the big books in the canon. I had seen the fashion and the design aesthetic out in the world, but I didn't know it had a name. So I went to the dinner party prepared to learn a lot about it, and during the conversation that unfurled, I was mesmerized, because whether or not I could relate to, you know, the dress-up aspect of it, or even the fantasy aspect of it, everything that people were talking about at that dinner table were themes and issues that were really meaningful to me on a daily basis, and I was hooked. Later, as we were drinking, as we're known to do after the shoot, I looked at Brian, and he knew what I was thinking, and I'm like, dude, I think I should travel with you and make the film version of this book that you're writing. And that was the genesis of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and did it change? You already said it kind of changed you. It hit you in parts that really appealed to you. What is the most significant change you experienced during that period?
Well, I think subcultures are really interesting to me, for sure. So I guess initially I imagined that it was much more of a social network, with people, really being pulled together by a desire to sort of hang out together, maybe, or like socialize together. I didn't know that it was quite as complex and much more, heady than it. I might have thought it was a little superficial at the beginning, before people started just watching the people walk in with top hats on, and I'm like, okay, I get this. I know what cosplay is. I know what those people are into. And I just had no idea that of the actual intellectual brain power that was going to be not only in that room, but in the entire community. And so, it touched on everything that is fascinating to me. Technology and how we deal with technology today is something that I think about all the time. And, history is fascinating to me as well. And so, like, those things coming together. And I was really excited by how many different rivers flowed into the ocean of steampunk, and there were just many things to talk about. Okay. So it just immediately became like not a 2-story house, but a 30-story skyscraper of stuff, and that was really cool.
Okay,
yeah.
And do you also now have costumes, and do you really partake in the community, or are you more like on the fringe, like an observer?
I think I'm on the fringe. I mean, I get asked this a lot. We were at the Seattle International Film Festival 3 weeks ago, and I kind of explained this to the audience, because when I showed up at that festival, you could tell they were disappointed that I didn't have an outfit on.
Okay.
It's so much so that they quickly took a quick director photo of me and shuttled me away and took pictures of all of the cast. I definitely think the way I came to this project was as an outsider, and I think that helped me tremendously in making the film, because I was able to ask really stupid questions along the way.
Yes.
And I actually presented this question many times to people who I got to know in the community, and I would always ask them, if I showed up tomorrow for that next interview that we're doing wearing a top hat, you would call bullshit on that, right? Because I would be like, a tourist in your community, and everybody agreed with that. So I got a lot of acceptance in the community for just being, myself, and didn't feel any need to go that far with it. I just think it would have been disingenuous for me to do that.
Right. No, but I often like to invite people who are also from outside the community, indeed, to get that observer perspective, get that perspective that. Things that are so obvious to you that they become invisible, as it were. Let's go to you, Brian. How involved are you with the documentary itself? What is your part in the documentary process?
Well, aside from being, it being based upon the book, and Byrd and the whole crew at Porter Panther being a part of the project. I mean, as we like to talk about the project, it's a book, yeah, and you've got the documentary. The documentary is kind of inspired by the book, but the documentary goes places that the book never went.
Right.
And conversely, the book goes places that the documentary doesn't go. And so for me, the two kind of live in this sort of lovely universe where they're all a part of Vintage Tomorrows. And for each, when James and I were writing the book, it allowed us to look at some subjects, go deep in some areas that would be terrible on film, would be awful on film, but also conversely it allowed Byrd and his crew went places that the book could never have gone.
Okay.
And I think captured nuances, captured ideas, captured things that were never even in the book. So I think for me they both kind of lived together. Mm-hmm. That said, I like to joke with people, granted it's inspired by the book James and I did, but really I'm just an actor. I mean, I'm just a part of, when it came to it, I mean, ultimately the documentary is Byrd's vision. And I'm a huge fan of it, but so much of what it came out of it and so much of the investigation that went on was very much, I think, from Byrd and also the whole Porter Panther crew of diving into places that they thought were really interesting and that played well inside of the documentary. So as I said, I loved going and seeing some of the early cuts and certainly seeing the final cut at the Seattle International Film Festival where they plumbed depths that we never did inside of the book. So for me, what I love about it is you can put the two next to each other and they become great companion pieces for each other.
Okay. I really do think of them as siblings, they, with some shared DNA, and they grew up in the same house, but they are unique people at the end of the day. Brian's being very modest about his role, though, in the film. Behind the scenes, he was my coach, because there were many times that, we shot 200, 300 hours of footage and kept shooting because we just became addicted to it. And he was the first person to say, okay, please stop and actually make the film. And, he was very, very good along the way. There's no chance we could have made this film without the strong foundation of work that he and James did. It would be foolish to imagine that we could have. So, yeah.
But it's a new kind of thing. Yeah, but it's a new type of thing. I mean, that's what, when we describe the project to people, and especially after, as we were getting near the middle, we were finishing up the book and you were really diving into the documentary, we would describe to people that, yeah, it's a book about steampunk, and it's a documentary that's based upon the book, but we're finishing the book and you're in the book because you're working that, and you're shooting us as we're finished writing the book. So it becomes this very weird, I think wonderfully 21st century type approach to storytelling, which there are very few projects that I've actually seen. And when we talk to people, specifically somebody like Henry Jenkins, who gave us this lovely foreword to the book, Henry is now at USC and is a professor who is called the Marshall McLuhan of the 21st century. He really got that. A lot of people really got the fact that this was a new thing. And I'm excited about that.
Having done it this way before, I'm only surprised that other people haven't done it before, and it's a great way to do it.
I think it's hard for people to get their head around though, because when you go to them, they're like, "Wait, is it a book or is it a documentary?" And our answer was always yes.
It's very interesting when you think about it, and like you said, you would expect this to be done more often, but. Now I think about it, I don't know any other examples. I do know people making interactive books like Steampunk Homes. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an interactive book it's a digital book, and you can actually get background information by clicking on images and stuff like that. And, it's
and there certainly have been documentaries based on books, before. That's not completely new, but yeah, the idea of making them at the same time, because so much of that research work that you're doing, applies to both sides, and it's just like you're using central resources together. We would do interviews that Brian and James weren't present for, but then we would provide them with a transcript.
And we use them in the book. Yeah, and we use them in the book. I mean, I think that's one of the things that you called out. I remember even more specifically, it was at 2 a.m. after we shot that dinner, the first dinner, where you and I were having a drink, and you're like, I think there's a documentary here. And that was one of the things you said. You said, every time you do one of these interviews, it's going to be visually amazing. Because they're steampunks. They show up, and they show up in their gear, and the gear is so much a part of it. And so I think you really pegged that early on, that's where the research also became a part of the filmmaking. Mm-hmm.
Right. And how many interviews are there in the documentary?
Oh, wow. I think there are 22 interviews with people that have more than one soundbite, who are developed, and you actually see their lower third. And that might be a low number.
That's a low number.
Is it 26 maybe?
A lot.
We right now on our website we're doing daily quote cards with a picture of a person and a quote. We have 40 of those, but we do have repeats in there. So a lot of people. but we probably interviewed 50 people, and some people just you couldn't fit them all into the.
Yeah, you got to make choices.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Or you didn't have the luxury that we had, again, from the writing standpoint, because what we, again, our first draft of the book was 800 pages.
Ah!
Yeah. So and the publisher, which is the folks at O'Reilly and the folks at Make, were lovely. They're like, we love the book. They were nothing but supportive. But they're like, if we sold this book, we have to sell this book for $55.
Yeah.
And like, we just can't sell it for $55, so you guys have to edit it.
And or it would have to come with a travel
Yeah,
kit
it was just
to carry
huge,
it around.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so what we ended up doing was cutting a lot of stuff out of it and doing that. It was like I had the same intervention with my editor. We had the thing that's like, you have to stop now and you have to do it. But what we ended up doing, and you can still get it online, is there's a second book. There's a second book called, I think it's the Cultural Historian's Notebook, which actually has a lot of those excerpts and things that were pulled out of it if people were really, really kind of really into it. And I know you can do it hopefully with some extra features and things that might be coming out on the website, but yeah, that's one of the things I think from a medium standpoint that really I think writing allows you to do, which you couldn't actually do with the actual film because it has so much of a form.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the...
That
Go
book
ahead.
is called the Cultural Notebook,
Yeah, the Cultural Historian's Notebook.
and that's by James, I assume.
It's by James and myself, yeah. So it was an ebook that came out along with the book itself. So I'm sure
They never made a print version of this? Okay.
I'm sure you could go and actually get it printed on the print-on-demand things, but no, we didn't actually do it.
Okay, well, if you can give me a link to it, we can put it in the description and people can look it up if they're interested.
It's photography is amazing.
Yeah, but speaking of James, is he involved in the documentary making?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the same capacity that Brian is, James and I actually probably traveled together a little bit more than Brian and I did. And so James is credited as the primary researcher for the documentary, and of course it's based on their book. Yeah, I was getting ready to say one of my favorite things about your book that was really hard to translate into documentary because it would have been a very specific kind of film. I love James's very personal and subjective portion of the book. Just in terms of the kind of nonfiction that I like to read, that just completely pulled me in, and I loved learning about where he's coming from as a person. How to develop that out in a documentary that's about a whole subculture, and with James not being completely a steampunk, that was tricky. We kind of auditioned that a little bit in the beginning, but no, he was present for a lot of it. Was very helpful in the rough cut phase and giving notes, and another champion of it along the way at points when I was fatigued.
Well, I would even say with James, he's a very specific type of historian. He's a cultural historian, and he calls himself an embedded historian. So he'll actually go and participate. So out of the three of us, he became a steampunk.
Yeah.
So he has this in his past. That's why we want to include it, that he was a reenactor as well. So he did American Civil War reenactments when he was younger. And as a cultural historian, he embeds himself in that culture. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I loved about it because, again, much like when Byrd would show up and they say, well, why aren't you a steampunk? And he would say he's a filmmaker, he's not a steampunk. And I would show up and they'd say, well, why aren't you a steampunk? I said, I'm a futurist. I'm not a steampunk. That would be disingenuous. Where James could do that. James did that as a part of his work as a historian, which I think really comes out in some interesting ways in some of the interviews and some of the things that you got in the documentary because he was so embedded. We actually did have somebody who became more and more and more of a steampunk. So I think that was an interesting interaction between all of us creators.
Yeah. And we should hook you up with James. He would be a delightful.
Yeah, I'd love to. I hope to have him on the show as well. Just like you, Brian, because especially when we're talking about the futurism stuff, that's worthy of another episode. So, and I'm also looking through his notes because I saw James' TEDx talk, and I thought I made some notes about that, but I can't find them. But he had some really nice things to say about using the lie of steampunk to emphasize real history. Paraphrasing him really badly, but for those people who are interested in that TEDx talk, I put it up at the Radio Retrofuture Facebook page. Worth a listen. Just like yours, Brian, you also did a TEDx talk about futurism and retrofuturism. And it's one of the things I wanted to ask you. You, in your TEDx talk, you talk about what a futurist does. That led me to the question, what does a retrofuturist do?
Well, I think that's a historian, possibly, or it's a historian who studies possible visions of what the future could have been. This is where things start to kind of go on top of each other there, because what James will tell you as a historian is, history is always in motion, just like the future is always in motion. That it's our understanding and it's the stories that we tell ourselves about these possible futures as well as these pasts. I mean, every historian will tell you that pasts are always constantly being rewritten. And it's that play back and forth with reality, with what we think is real and what isn't real, and that was what steampunk brought out massively. It was not only playing with the past, it was also playing with what they wanted in the future, which I think for James and I was the big inspiration for the book.
Okay. Well, I also got to that question because I was on the Fedora Chronicles past week. It's a podcast done by Eric Fisk of the Fedora Chronicles, and he dubbed me a retro-futurist activist. So kind of on what does a retro-futurist activist do?
I don't know. I think, well, what do you do?
Well, yes, basically.
Tell us. I'm just a plain old futurist.
Yeah. Well, I also have two groups. I'm working on the theme group of Radio Retrofuture to do presentations and workshops and promote, talented steampunks. But also have Ragdeck, the 113th Ragdeck. I don't know if you've seen that, and if not, I'll show you a link later on. And then I lost my train of thought because, yes, another thing Eric asked me is also in some of those memes you have on your site, those daily things. There were also a number of people, or maybe it was just one, I don't remember, who also said, well, we consider ourselves retrofuturists. And Eric asked me, is retrofuturism as a label going to take over steampunk?
I honestly need you both to explain to me the difference, because I still, when this debate comes up, I get a little bit lost in it. What would be the difference between retrofuturism and steampunk? Is it all the same stuff without the clothes?
No, I mean, I think retrofuturism would be a thread running through it, right? Thinking about history, playing around with history, then also thinking about the future and possible future histories, right? And the future histories that maybe in futures that had never actually happened.
Right.
So I think that's like a mode of thought that then runs through steampunk. But steampunk as a cultural movement is so much larger than that.
Right.
Right. I think that it's a theme and a strong undercurrent, just like it's in the documentary that making is the religion, and the maker movement is sort of part of the religion of steampunk as well. I think making, as you actually point out, making is a thread that runs through, but it doesn't subsume all of steampunk. I think steampunk is a cultural movement that is a blanket that goes over many, many things. And that's what's wonderful about cultural movements and cultural history, is that it's a big tent that you can put a lot of different things under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a rather interesting discussion because you approach it on a whole other way than I do. Because I consider retrofuturism this kind of umbrella term for movements like dieselpunk and steampunk and whatever punk writers come up with to sound original. I'm not that fond of all those different labels because, anyway. But
too many labels. It's all getting at the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's all you've got to people show pictures on Facebook and ask, is it diesel punk or is this punk or is it that punk? And I'm like, well, it's retrofuturistic, and for me that's the end of discussion.
The bigger question is, do you like that picture?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of the thing. Like, also Eric Fisk, I heard him on another episode of not the Fedora Chronicles, but he also has panels, and they were talking about how Star Wars, I think it was the first prequel movie, was dieselpunk. And and then he used these kind of arguments. It would say, well, you could use exactly the same arguments to describe it as steampunk. So, you know, it always...
Discourse, I think. I think it's the discourse and the conversations that's interesting.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that you have people fighting about atomic punk and steampunk and diesel punk and all of that. Fine. What we've learned our joke always with steampunk is you can ask 5 experts and you'll get 6 opinions about
exactly.
Exactly. It's about the conversation. That's what's so lively about it, why it doesn't go away and why it's so interesting. So when I hear folks talk about that, I'm like, more of that. That's good. That's what makes it interesting is if somebody goes, here, is this steampunk or not, yes or no, and it's binary, it's yes or no, that's boring. That's actually when it starts to die, is when it has no life. It's in that discourse, that conversation is why it's so vibrant and the culture is still around.
Wonderful perception. For that reason, because I don't like to have that discussion, like I have my groups, Radio Retrofuture and Ragtag, and everybody's like, no, Ragtag is steampunk, no, Ragtag is dieselpunk, no, Ragtag, and I'm like, it's Retrofuturism. I have the aesthetic because I wanted to tell that specific story, and top hats don't fit in that, and I also didn't want to use the color brown because it's done to death by now, and it's really interesting that people try to fit that group that's not supposed to fit in that way under a label, but it also brings me, you're talking about the discourse on the subject, and one of the things you talk about both in the book and also in one of your podcasts, you talk to the people who made the dreaded Justin Bieber video. So what was your reaction to the outcry by the steampunk community of, this isn't steampunk?
Oh, I think it's good and healthy. I mean, again, for me, if you're saying, I sort of came to it as, and we write about this in the book, and it's certainly in the documentary, which, as James, my co-author, always said, when you see top hats and goggles, think culture change, right? That's actually what's going on. Just like with the hippie movement, when you saw tie-dye, he said, think culture change. When somebody puts on a tie-dye t-shirt back in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, didn't all of a sudden mean they were for the radical overthrow of the government. It was just that they were interested in this subculture, which meant something was going on. The moment Justin Bieber took on and basically put on the top hat, you could see that meant change. And then that's why in the book and why doing the research, I picked up the phone and very quickly got to talk to his folks, and that's actually why they did it. They were actually doing it because it was about the intersection between the old and the new and where things were going. And they were actually quite smart about it and quite nice about it. And that's, many people don't want to hear that Justin Bieber and Scooter Braun, the people who made it, are actually quite smart and quite savvy and very good people. Now, on the other side of that, I can completely understand that you start seeing people who get very, very upset as something moves from a subculture, something that's quite small, that moves into the mainstream. And it's always a tension. I think it's always a tension, and James calls this out quite brilliantly, that it's always this tension that the moment it becomes mainstream, it's no longer a subculture, that it starts to lose its power and lose its sort of counterculture resonance. So really, I can understand people's reaction to it because it means the thing that they love is losing its power, losing its cool. And so that, I think, is, again, a very healthy tension to say, well, if I think it's cool, shouldn't everybody think it's cool? Don't we all want to live in a steampunk world? Well, yeah, of course, that'd be awesome if everybody lived in a steampunk world, but then it's not so special and it's not so much a subculture or a counterculture. But that conversation, again, that's the conversation we want to have. So for me, when people talk about the Justin Bieber video, to me it's not the dreaded Justin Bieber video, it's the one that you can just sort of set down on the table and just step back and watch people just get very, very upset about, which is good. That conflict in discourse is good.
Yeah. I think I just wish it was a better music video. Whoops.
That's because you're a director.
What put me off was the disjointed, you had the steampunk of Justin Bieber, and then you had R for Christmas.
I was going to say the Christmas and the steampunk thing,
apparently the movie seems to be good. I haven't seen it, but I heard good things about it. So that's not the problem here. But yeah, that's one of.
When I think of Madonna, 25 years ago, going into Vogue culture and the ball scene of New York and going in and then exposing that very cool underground world to the masses. And I think for the most part that was a really good thing. It gave that community a lot of attention that they deserved. But many people in that community were like, okay, white straight woman, go away. This is our party and you are not welcome here. I think that's kind of what I always thought of with the Justin Bieber video.
Okay. Let's see. The question got a bit mixed up there, but that doesn't matter. Let's see. Yes. Well, let's just start about the documentary. What can people expect from the documentary itself? What will they see? And
have you?
Go ahead.
Have you seen the film?
Not yet. I didn't know it was already available. I thought it was
I thought I sent you a link. How on earth did I not send you a link before this interview? That's crazy.
Yeah, well, it happens. It happens. But no, I am waiting for a surprise, so that's good.
There you go. The film, I think it's definitely made for people who are maybe familiar a little bit with steampunk, but on the outside of it. So we spend quite a bit of time around this debate of what is it, how do you put it into a nutshell, and there's a lot of that conversation takes place early on so that you get grounded, and then we try to take you through an example of how steampunk plays out in a variety of different creative ways, and that is all necessary and wonderful because you get to see a lot of great artwork, a lot of great maker movement, creations, a lot of great fashion, and you get to hear from many of the writers who sort of built up the subgenre in the very beginning, and that is sort of the first half of the film. And the second half of the film is, I think, where it gets really, really interesting. What does all of this mean, and where does this go, and why is this happening right now, and why is it taking off? And it's really great to just hear all of these people talking about it. It's crazy. This is a film, I've made other films before. This is a film where talking heads and sound bites are, they're almost like the most incredible B-roll that you ever had. So we just play all of these different energies and personalities and opinions off of one another. Our editor, Alan Winston, is amazing in how he weaves this together. And I don't know, it's... I think it covers a lot of ground, but it asks a lot of really provocative questions. For me, out of all of it, the stuff that I really resonated the most for me, so probably gets the most screen time, is just the question of what does it mean about how we interact with technology today? And what does it reveal about what isn't working and what could possibly be done to change that? And that's where I think the film really begins to get climactically, going for me. And then there's just a lot of wonderful personalities along the way. I think one of the things that works really well for film that might be a little trickier in a book about this is just getting to know some of the people and getting to know their personalities and some of their backstories and what makes them tick and how they light up when they're expressing themselves within this world is pretty great stuff. There is a wedding at the very end that should make you cry if you have a heart.
It's a beautiful wedding. And what I will say, what you can expect, and I won't be the first one to say it is a definitive steampunk documentary. And I can say that, Byrd can't say that, but other people have said it too. Other reviewers have said it as well, and has recognized that what Byrd and the Porter Panther team have been able to do is, number one, just explain the subculture, explain what's going on in a way that's very respectful, that understands it and values it, sometimes questions it, sometimes makes fun of it, but never looks down on it, very much captures it. But then once that's happened, goes even deeper, says what are the implications? What are the implications on culture? What are the implications on sort of gender and government and technology? But it goes a little bit deeper. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that coming to it sort of not only from writing the book, but more coming to it just as a person who also sort of sits outside of steampunk, it goes deep. And it's not afraid to actually get into details and ask some hard questions that I think many other explanations, whether they be in print or whether they be in video, where I see people talk about steampunk, they're more talking about the spectacle of steampunk. And they're not digging deep into the intelligence that's behind the subculture. And I think that's what Byrd does a great job of in the documentary.
Excellent. Well, you better send me that link quickly then.
I can't believe, honestly, so I apologize. I can't believe I That's embarrassing.
Yeah, it can happen. Can happen. But what do you hope other steampunks will take away from this documentary, or non-steampunks for that matter?
Well, I think people who really love this world have a lot to think about how do you keep steampunk going, or how do you keep your own connection to this alive and vibrant, maybe as it morphs. Because I think when we were beginning to shoot in 2011, you could argue that there was probably more palpable steampunk stuff around. Probably 2012 is when there was the most amount of that around. And having just done some recent conventions and showing the film, it took us 4 years to make it, and I apologize. People have begun to ask me, do you feel like we feel that it's waning a little bit, and do you see that? And the only evidence I have is that they're asking me that question. Mm-hmm. So I think in the film, people are talking about, how can we take what's really great about this and what's exciting and actually make it a sustainable thing so that it doesn't just become a blip, in the radar.
Exactly.
And I think that the steampunk community has a lot to think about that. I don't think there's going to be any shortage of conventions or opportunities for people to get together, but how else can you keep it alive? Some of the writers that we interviewed, and this was in 2011 when we were doing the interviews, were expressing their exhaustion with, just steam engines or just goggles, or, more has to be done with it. One of the best interviews that we did for the book is with a woman named Nisi Shaw. She's a African-American science fiction writer, and she, in her interview, she's blunt about it. She really wants to love steampunk, but she has trouble with, the imperialism theme of it and the colonialism aspects of it. And her rally cry that's in the film is, there's so much continent, there's so much globe to work with. Why not take the ideas of steampunk and explore them, in other cultures, and not just, focusing on England?
I want to interject on that topic, because it's also one of the I had a number of interviews on this channel by now. This is the 19th episode, meaning that I had over 20 individuals on this channel talking about subjects like this. And have you read the Steampunk's user manual by Jeff van der Meer?
Sure. They're in the film. They're interviewed in the film.
Because you've got the same discussions with all these creators. They all want. That's why I prefer. This is disconnected to my thing with rather being a retrofuturist than a steampunk. Is that you hear a lot of people, especially the ones that are more on the fringe of it. For example, you've got, I have a friend who was a goth before he got into steampunk. And the reason why he got into steampunk, because with goth it was, you've got only so many shades of black. And right now he says, you've got only so many shades of brown. And people are getting kind of tired of the Victorian look. And that's why they appreciate me so much, because I don't have that. I have a completely different thing going on. I don't know if you've seen my costumes, but it's completely different, and people are flocking to that, especially from outside steampunk. People are flocking to me. The people who are in the steampunk community rather stay where they are, and I think that's troubling. And I have those same. One of the reasons that I started my blog, Tupperware Steampunk, and why I started this is, what do steampunks really want? Where do we really want to go, and how can we make that happen? I think that's really important, because, like you said, we want to prevent steampunk becoming that blip. And if we don't let go of the Victorian era and all that goes with that, that might just happen because people get tired of it. Convention organizers get tired of it because
there's probably only so much gold you can mine from that mine. There's just there's nothing new there to some degree. I think that's sort of where everything ended up in terms of the interviews that really went places everybody's really curious, can it be reinvented so that it's pulling fresh stuff to the surface? And I think it can. I think there's something really great about the community. I tell people all the time that whenever I would go away for 3 days and interview a bunch of steampunks, I'd come back intellectually wasted, because there is so much brain power in this community. I don't think I've ever been in any convention or mass group of people with higher IQs in my life. This is a smart, passionate group of people. And these people are people that are really sort of tired of being complacent and just taking the media in that is sent to them, or just being passive at their computers. They actually want to do shit. So with all of that brain power and all that enthusiasm for using your hands, what can you do with that? And I think that's sort of the open question. Yeah. I think that's why I really love the maker movement and the maker community, is like, that's really tangible, and that's exciting to see people building things that are real and exploring and inventing in that way. And I think that, is just tremendously, there's so much potential there. I don't know that it's going to save the planet, but maybe it could. Who knows?
Well, I think you should point out that steampunk has ebbed and flowed for as long as it's been around. I mean, you get into this a little bit in the documentary. We get into it pretty deeply in the book, that you've got Jeter first coining it, and you've got the difference engine kind of coming out from Bruce Sterling and William Gibson, and people talking about it and it being around, but it kind of then went away. And it really wasn't on the scene. It wasn't that big a part. You had people doing a little bit of it, but then it started roaring back around 2005, 2007. And so I think there's enough resilience in it because of exactly what you said, because of the intelligence of it, because of the retrofuturism in it, allows it to stay fresh. That it's not just about wearing a certain color, it's not just about fashion, it's not just about music, it's not about this, it's something that is much broader. And you can call it retrofuturism, we can call it making, we can call it steampunk or whatever, but it's that. And people always say, oh, I was like this before I found steampunk, or I was like this before I found retrofuturism. Turns out I've always been like this. This is now who I identify with. And I think that's that big tent that I'm talking about. That's that cultural umbrella that people can kind of gather under. And I think that's what will keep steampunk around, is that it has enough resilience, and it's done it before, and I do think it'll do it again.
And so there's a real importance within the community, I think, in terms of sharing information and giving. There's a lot of transference of information and contact highs that people get off of each other in terms of what they're doing. And I think that's another thing, that's really great. The idea that, what is the mean age of a steampunk? I don't want to get scandalous here, but it's probably not 20. It's probably more like 30. These are people that are passionately doing something that most 30-year-olds are not supposed, or 40 or 50-year-olds are not supposed to be doing, right? You're not supposed to be acting that much like, a free spirit. You should have a job, and that kind of thing. These people are not going to buy into that. So they're going to find a place to put their energy. And I think it'll just be interesting to see whether that remains steampunk or if that morphs into something broader with maybe without a name, A lot of the people that I interviewed in 2011 when I talk to them now, are either a lot more into steampunk or a little bit less into steampunk, but almost nobody is in the same exact place that they were 5 years ago, and I think that's really interesting. These are people that really will force it to evolve and for themselves find a new way to get excited about it, or they'll do something completely different.
Well, that brings up the interesting question, how can we make steampunk more better, so to speak? What do you think is something that you already talked about, how resilient it is, which is good, but is there something you think, well, we need to work on this as a community?
Oh, I would say don't stop arguing and don't stop creating.
Okay.
I think that's it. I mean, I think it's people, like you said, the contact high as well. It's don't stop making stuff, doing stuff, creating costumes, creating music, creating literature, creating art, whatever, because ultimately steampunk is incredibly creative. And then don't stop arguing about it. Don't stop sharing it. Don't stop getting the contact high of going to conventions, of going and doing podcasts. I mean, that's what keeps it alive. And actually, I think is if you don't make it dogmatic, if you say that here's the box and this is what's, is and nothing else will be considered. Well, that's never happened because people have always had that argument, because it's in that, I think, in that freedom, which will keep pulling new people in and keep other people around and still interested. And maybe they may not even call themselves steampunk anymore, but they'll still be involved. Mm-hmm. They'll still have an ear out for it. They'll still see something that if somebody comes up with something new and fresh and interesting, then it'll pull them right back in.
Okay, interesting. Do you expect that steampunk will move into different time periods and well, more cultural settings?
I think it has to. Yeah. I mean, there's only so much you could do with that one place and that time period. Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, going back to your diesel punk, you know, the difference between this punk or that punk, who knows? But there's just so many other histories that you can open up and play with,
and you should punk them all.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Exactly.
I think that's what I love about it. You should punk everything. I think that's what China Mieville said. Just punk everything. Go and just punk. That it's not about so much the steam. Steam is just the setting. That's fine. It's the Victorian era where things were powered by steam. That's why I love diesel punk and atomic punk and you name it. Don't care. Just punk everything, because that's the joy of it, is the punking. It's the verb.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Just punk everything. Just go. Let's see. There was. I keep losing my train of thought. There's just too much coming at me right now.
Well, one of the things though you can expect, and I think one of the things you can do with this documentary is, if you in the steampunk community, if anybody says, "Well, what's a steampunk?" just send them to the documentary, or like your mom, or your grandma, or somebody else.
If nothing else, I made the answer for you in a video, so you don't have to bother with that anymore.
Say, by the way, they've made a documentary about what I do, and it's really, you should just watch that.
So,
okay, well, I might. Well,
it'll be for your extended family.
Well, I might, just play the documentary in the background when I have my theme group end this month. We'll have a projector in a tent, and just have that playing in the background before I give my presentations. I'll be quoting you a lot, by the way, so...
So maybe, Bonzard, you could help me with something. I'm getting interviewed, as the film is getting ready to come out on July 19th, I'm getting interviewed by some media about the film, and that is the first question everybody asks: what is steampunk? What is the fastest way that you found to define it for people? Because, less is more...
I keep flip-flopping on that, because...
Your best one. Audition it for me.
Oh dear, what's my current one? Well, I always say, well, it's a movement inspired by 19th century science fiction, but that's very vague. When I have more time, I often explain. Well,
some people that I talk to, I don't know that they know what a movement is. That's just too broad.
And we also used to say, a lot of people used Verne as an example. People are asking, who's Jules Verne? So yeah, I haven't found the quick answer yet.
It is impossible, and
it's
so when these
impossible.
Are off, like they're asking me that question, and I'm like, la 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 la, I'm all over the map, and I give them like 8 versions that they can choose from, and they're like exhausted.
You got so many jokes about it. Like, do you know who Jules Verne is? Have you seen the movie Wild Wild West? Well, crap.
The one that opens up people's eyes the most for the really uninitiated, when I say Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that really brings it home for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. Yeah, the problem is, like, it's a genre of science fiction. It's a aesthetic. It's a community. How do you define that in one sentence?
I think that's it. You probably just gave me the sentence, and I just need to make that.
Well, I have a number of articles based on those 3 definitions, because science fiction genre, community, and what was the last one? Aesthetic movement.
But I think if you had to get granular, I really do feel more often than not that I go to, it's a subgenre of science fiction. I feel like that's the most factual thing, because I do think it starts there. Now, where it's gone from there,
well, you could also say it's cyberpunk in the past.
Yeah,
that's the one you hear.
If you don't know what cyberpunk is.
I just call it a cultural movement. I mean, I call it a subculture, because it includes, and why I liked it is Granted, it's science fiction, whether it be written or filmed or drawn, but it's also fashion, it's also music, it's also political. It's so much, and it really is a culture, and that is what drew me in. Yep.
Well, we're already reached the 50-minute mark, I think we gotta go to the last few questions, or else we're gonna be a long time here because there's a lot to talk about.
Bring us back on after you've seen the film. You'll have many questions.
Oh, well, maybe we'll have to make another arrangement then at one point.
Sure.
Okay, but what will you do when the film is done? When the release date has happened, what will you do then?
I will take a vacation. Is what I'll do. As you probably know, because you probably have made films or know plenty of people who have, it kind of never ends. You know, you lock your picture in the edit room and you actually hit export and it's the thing, and you get your first DVD of it. You're like, oh, this is done. It's actually not done. So right now it's about really trying to spread the word and get people to know about the existence of this film. We're still a very tiny little film in the broad sea of films. Our distributor, Samuel Goldwyn, really loves our film, though, and so they're putting a lot of strategy behind how we can really bring it to a broad audience. So if anybody watching this wants to see the film, it's going to be available in the United States and pretty much any English-speaking territory on July 19th, and Japan. I don't know why Japan qualified, but also Japan. And it's going to be available on DVD as well, iTunes DVD, Amazon. And so right now it's about just trying to bring people to it and continue. I do want to continue showing it in person within the community. I think that's really important for this film, just to provide an opportunity for people to get together and respond to it. It's really a blast to do Q&As with this film, more than any film that I've done.
Because you've done quite a few. That's
yeah.
Well, I don't know if I can support you in some way, and
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I think. Do you have any other? Do you have questions for me, or remarks, or some things we haven't covered yet?
I would just like to know what brought you to steampunk. I'm sure you covered that on all 19 previous episodes, but what was?
Well, it's kind of the cliche answer. Like I always had those interests, and I done like 14th century reenactment for about 14 years in total, with some years overlapping between that and steampunk. I always enjoyed the anachronistic elements. One of my I always liked, the idea of Jules Verne and Leonardo da Vinci, so it already started there at a very young age. Where did it go from then? Then I remember, one of my clearest memories was my first contacts with a RPG called Shadowrun. And there was this cover of a magazine, a local geek magazine, on miniature gaming. It had this elf, which was just, typical elf, but she had this digital device on her hip, and, that just really appealed to me, that contrast. And one of the things I enjoyed very much about the 14th century was that period of transition. You had the Black Death, and you had the coming of the age of firearms, and you had the transition from segmented armor to full plate armor, what the Middle Ages are ironically now known for. And that contrast really appealed to me about that period. So it really is the stark contrast between history, fighting itself. Like you've got these people that want to keep things the way things are, but also want to progress forward. There's a kind of a really contradictory statement. It's always really weird how much we want to keep things the same while enjoying the fruits of the coming age. And I never really looked at it before right now I think of it, but I think that's one of the things of steampunk that we really like, the old stuff, the history, the sense of history. but you also want to, if we want to have to experience the Victorian era again, we want to do it in with all the luxuries we enjoy today. So it's really that hyper nostalgia, so to speak.
Well said. I wish I had interviewed you for the film.
Oh, well, you still have that chance, but not for the film, but whatever. I'm always available.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Anything for Brian before we lose his brain trust?
No.
Can I ask him a question? I would like to ask him one really quick. What did you learn? What was the big takeaway from the whole project? I mean, in any way, even in a personal, subjective way.
I think when we write about it, and we talked about it actually, is that for me as a futurist going into it, it was the ultimate question was, if people are playing with the past, doesn't that mean they want a different future? So like, what can steampunk teach us about the future of technology? And I really do believe that steampunk is a cultural indicator for myself as a futurist that tells me that people want different things from their technology. They want to have a different relationship with their technology. And they want their technology to be more, have a sense of humanity. They want it to have a sense of history. They also want it to have a sense of humor. And that these things, although they sound quite high level, if you start applying it to every single piece of technology around, say, what would it be like if this camera had a sense of humor? Like, what would it do if it was quirky, right? What we definitely want all of these sort of slim things to no longer be slim things anymore, but to actually have some humanity and to actually understand that it's built. And when I say built by people, it's not like, well, of course people build it, but it's like, no, like there's humanity in this. Like human beings have touched this who you don't know. And it also makes you think, well, then how was it put together? And where was it put together? And who were those people? And what were their conditions? And what was that? And it starts making you ask all these different questions, which that was the thing for me, which I think is still incredibly true, incredibly vibrant. And as we move into the future and we start thinking about technology, these are questions we should need to continue to ask ourselves.
Well, I want to show you a little example. I haven't really showed it, but this robot is a miniature from a game called Dystopian Wars. And it's from the Prussian army. And you must imagine that a tank is like the tip of my finger right here. That's what the tank, that's like the mouse tank, if you know it, what it is. So that's for comparison. There's even a bigger robot, but I don't have it handy. But this robot right here has the coat of arms I used to have as a reenactor.
Oh, awesome!
And like you said, we want the objects we have on our person to make a statement about who we are and what we like. I think that's what you mean with the sense of humanity and so yeah, I think that's completely true what you say. And if you like whimsy, like a lot of steampunks do, what your equipment is whimsical. And I like the more cyberpunk. I really like the cyberpunk element. So my equipment is very cyberpunk. Like I also have like for my character, I have Dankert Lexicon, who's a clanker, a Victorian-esque hacker, who has a mobile phone in his arm piece where he can take pictures with, because I needed that to take, as a blogger, I wanted to take pictures on events, but I didn't like the idea. I had to take out my phone all the time and then like completely out of character. So a friend of me called Niels Dijkstra, he has a small workshop called Rattles and Wheels, and he made a version for me. I can actually like fold up, so I can still use the camera, but it's not ideal, but at least it gives you a real sense of being what I am. The explorer, taking pictures of people, interrogating them. And now I'm doing this. So yeah.
Thanks for telling me a little bit about how you found it. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
So, if people want to know anything more about the documentary, please visit www.vintagetomorrows.com. We update that all the time with how you can find the film, where you can see the film, and certainly, what's the best place to visit for your book?
www.vintagetomorrows.com.
There is information
There's
about
actually,
the book.
yeah.
You can
That's the
find
great
it
thing
there,
is that your website is the collection of all the best stuff.
Yeah,
We
how
can-
can people watch your movie?
July 19th, the movie is released on iTunes, so you can rent it on iTunes. If you're in, I'll send you the list of places where it's going to be released initially. And after that, Amazon Prime, if you use that. How do you watch movies, Bonesart? What's the way you...
I prefer YouTube usually.
A variety of platforms that'll be available, and after that it'll be available as a DVD, an actual tangible object that you can touch.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final messages for the listeners before we sign off?
No, thanks for having us today. This was a lot of fun, actually.
It was great. It was really good to talk to you.
So anyone who's interested in this documentary, links will be down in the description. And of course, we hope to see you next week. I forgot who we have next week, but it will be an interesting guest, I promise you.